There is a super interesting article in the New York Times about Tucker Carlson and journalists and anonymous sources that I want to look at with you today. And what's most interesting, there's a few things that are interesting about this article. One are the things we learn about Tucker Carlson specifically, but also what we learn about this relationship in terms of trading for access that exists in general in politics, but also in the political media space. So let's jump right into it. The article in the New York Times called Tucker Carlson Calls Journalists Animals. He's also their best source. And the article by Ben Smith starts, last month, I texted Tucker Carlson to ask him a question that was on my mind. Did you get vaccinated? When was the last time you had sex with your wife and in what position? He replied. We can trade intimate details. Then we argued back and forth about vaccines, and he ended the conversation with a friendly invitation to return to his show. Always a good time. One question you may be asking, if you're a New York Times reader, is why are you exchanging texts with Tucker Carlson, the Fox News host who recently described the media at large as cringing animals who are not worthy of respect? And if you're a Tucker Carlson viewer, you may also be asking, how can the guy who tells you every night that the media is lying be texting with the enemy? The answer is one of Washington's open secrets. Mr. Carlson, a proud traitor to the elite political class, spends his time when he's not denouncing the liberal media, trading gossip with them. He's the go-to guy for sometimes unflattering stories about Donald J. Trump and for coverage of the internal politics of Fox News, not to mention stories about Carlson himself. I won't talk here about any off-the-record conversations I may have had with him, but 16 other journalists, none from the Times, told me on background that he has been, as three of them put it, a great source. In Trump's Washington, Tucker Carlson is a primary super secret source. The media writer and Trump chronicler Michael Wolff writes in his forthcoming collection of essays. He explained, I know this because I know what he has told me, and I can track his exquisite, too good not to be true gossip through unsourced reports and as it often emerges into the accepted wisdom. So takeaway number one is, we knew it, but this is confirmation. Tucker Carlson plays a character on his program. In the midst of all the anti-vaccine stuff, he's almost certainly been vaccinated, as has his family, I'm sure. In the midst of all of his attacks on the media and his sort of kowtowing to this populist stuff that he does, he is a sort of regular elite insider that communicates with all these very same people. Shouldn't surprise us. We already suspected that. Article goes on to say, Mr. Carlson was particularly well positioned to be a source about the Trump administration. His Fox platform, where in May he had a nightly average of 3 million viewers, made him someone who mattered to Trump, a close follower of television ratings. He has a former reporter's eye for detail and anecdote, and his observations can be detected in the lurid tales of Trump's chaotic court and Fox's own tumultuous internal politics. A coming book by the reporter Michael Bender includes a moment in which Carlson sends Trump's calls to voicemail after the first presidential debate last fall, when he was criticized for repeatedly interrupting Joe Biden. When Trump finally reaches Carlson, the book describes verbatim an exchange between the two men that casts Mr. Carlson in a flattering light. Everyone says I did a good job, Trump tells Carlson. I don't know who told you that was good, Mr. Carlson says. It was not good. Mr. Bender declined to comment on the sourcing that allowed him to so precisely reconstruct a conversation between the two men. Of course, the belief would be, well, the source is Tucker himself. The article continues. Brian Stelter, the host of the CNN show Reliable Sources, told me, quote, you can see Tucker's fingerprints all over the hardcover edition of his 2022 book Hoax, which excoriates Fox for amplifying Trump's falsehoods. He said he couldn't stomach talking to Carlson, who has grown ever more hardline for the updated paperback version that was just released. Carlson was born to a world of insiders and story shapers and makes no secret of it. His father was a reporter in LA and San Diego before Reagan appointed him director of Voice of America, and the son grew up with a generation of elite Washington journalists. In 2018, Tucker said, I've always lived around people who were wielding authority around the ruling class. A former New York Observer media writer, Sridhar Papu, recalled to me that when he first traveled to Washington to cover the White House Correspondents Association dinner in the 2000s, it was Carlson who asked him, do you have an invitation to Tammy's? Referring to the annual brunch for media insiders co-hosted by Tammy Haddad, the well-connected former MSNBC producer. So here you start to get the sense that not only is Tucker not the guy waging war on the so-called elite media, he's actually a guy trading on his membership in that very group in his private life. Surprising? Not at all. Not at all. A couple other interesting things here. Carlson said he turned against his fellow elites after the 2008 financial crisis. His political shift also transformed his long journeyman's career as a writer, magazine writer, and MSNBC conservative, and made him Fox's leading tribune of the pro-Trump masses. But his decades of Washington relationships have produced a tiresome conversation among Carlson's old friends about what he really stands for, whether he's really a racist or whether he cynically plays one on TV. Who knows? And what does it matter anyway? That's the same analysis of Trump. When we've said, oh, it sort of seems like Trump plays coy with anti-Semitic stuff, but his daughter converted to Judaism, his grandkids are Jewish, his son-in-law, et cetera, et cetera. What you have to remember is that it doesn't actually matter in the end if Trump placates and coalesces that very group. It doesn't really matter what's in his head, and that is amplified with Tucker Carlson as well. And the article points out, as we have, Carlson's recent fixations include suggesting the January 6th Capitol insurrection was a provocation staged by the FBI and that making children wear masks is abuse. Do we know whether that is really Tucker's view or not? No, we don't. I suspect it's not. But that is something that will remain a question. So the takeaways are Tucker's just like all of these other people. There's really no difference. He is the very same type of elite that he decries. And unfortunately, and I don't want to make this a bigger thing about populism and grifting in general, but there is a lot of populist rhetoric that is rhetoric alone, and it is not actually the beliefs of the individuals behind it. And that can apply on the left and the right. On the right, a lot of the populist rhetoric is a cover for just a sort of like elite, typical dude like Tucker. On the left, sometimes the populist rhetoric is cover for an authoritarian tendency, which we've also talked about before. Last thing, you might remember Donald Trump's discussions of anonymous sources. Anonymous sources shouldn't be allowed. Trump even seemingly misunderstanding that an anonymous source isn't anonymous to the journalist. It's typically that the journalist is just saying, I won't identify you. It's very interesting that such a notable figure on the right is such a prominent anonymous source when he's supposedly part of a movement that decries the status quo of the media, which, as fomented by Donald Trump during his presidency, includes the criticism of the use of anonymous sources. So nothing massively surprising in the article. It confirms a lot of things we suspected, but very interesting in that our suspicions seem to have been very much accurate about Tucker Carlson. If you ever feel like you just don't have enough time to read all the books you want to read, you have to check out one of my favorite apps called Blinkist. Blinkist takes thousands of popular nonfiction books and distills each one down into an ebook or audiobook that you can get through in just 15 minutes, where you're getting all the key takeaways from the book. Just imagine how you'll be able to expand your horizons and knowledge by being able to soak up all of the important insights from 10 different books in an afternoon. Obviously, it's perfect for exposing yourself to a new book you otherwise wouldn't have time for, or you can use it to revisit a book you've already read, or use it to preview a book before you buy the full version and read it. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way, and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month, and you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video.